Hi everyone. So despite years of fiscal austerity, the UK government continues to run a fiscal budget deficit. A recent Economist article focused on the fact that government expenditure cuts are as likely to have gone as far as they can possibly go while providing the current level of provision that the government does. So therefore, the only way to actually resolve this fiscal position is to increase taxation in all likelihood. Let's take a look at the options. Okay, so broadly speaking, this comes down to three areas: direct taxation on incomes, indirect taxation on consumption, or alternatively taxation on wealth. We need to raise £80 billion or 4% of the country's gross domestic product to actually resolve this fiscal deficit. So let's look at the first area. Well, when it comes to income taxation, we of course have a progressive based system in the UK economy, but the UK actually raises far less than the OECD average country, and that really suggests that there is a need for reform there if we want to continue to provide that level of public services. Now Labour, well, they suggest a corporation tax increase from 19 to 26% there. So this is an interesting move, and of course in theory would help to actually raise tax revenues, but what about the impact upon investment? What about the impact upon research and development? What about impact on inward FDI as a direct result of such a move? Moreover, they also want to tax those earning £80,000 a year or more, an additional tax rate, and they argue that that would help to raise £25 billion. Others of course argue against that and say no, it would actually reduce taxation if anything. So it's highly controversial, that, and of course going back to the Laffer curve, well, you can analyse that as such a move brilliantly there. Okay, so another method that has been proposed is broadening the tax base. Now the rate at which people start being taxed has been increased under the Conservative government, which has directly benefited the lowest earners in society. So that has been raised from £6,500 up to £11,500. But this could be reduced to £10,000 perhaps, and in doing so that would help to actually raise £9 billion of tax revenue in theory. Again, it's just an estimate, so it's highly regressive in such a move, but nevertheless it would theoretically help. But of course the government is going to look very, very nasty in targeting those lowest income earners there. Okay, so what about taxation on consumption? So of course we've got VAT at 20%, but there's exemptions on essential items, for instance baby food, children's clothes and so on, as well as newspapers. So if all of those exemptions were actually scrapped, well, that would actually raise £80 billion, but is described certainly as a move which is politically toxic, because again it's highly regressive in its nature there. Okay, so once again we see a very, very controversial move, but it's also worth noting that when it comes to consumption and taxing consumption, these actual exemptions, well, that benefits the most well-off as well as the poorest in society. So yeah, there just isn't a clear way to actually target those that can afford children's clothes at a slightly higher price and contribute more tax and so on. So that's one of the key problems within taxing consumption, that you are in effect providing some exemptions to the most well-off in society as well. So what about wealth? Well, it tends to be the most growth-friendly tax generally, and it can also theoretically help to combat intergenerational inequality between those asset owners that own houses as well as shares and so on, against those of the younger generation that do not have that asset ownership. Okay, there could also be a doubling in the council tax, which would help to raise £34 billion. What about inheritance tax? Well, that could also be increased perhaps, or a land value tax could be used to really target those those landowners, and this is something which is difficult to avoid. But certainly when it comes to council taxation, it's really important that those values that are measured against, I think it's a 1991 measurement, are actually updated. If those measures are updated, then they'd reflect any extensions, any increases in the actual values, and so on. So that would provide a real boost to the fiscal coffers, but at the same time, it would of course reduce disposable incomes. But it's also worth noting here that that same Economist article highlighted the fact that Buckingham Palace's council tax is £1,400 per year. That's round about the same, the article claimed, as a flat in Bradford. Okay, so making sure that council tax valuations are accurate is certainly something that could be used here. Okay, right. Most of these ideas, though, are too radical, and when you think about public choice theory, what you're really going to do here is consider the fact that most of these concepts are politically toxic. Any government would make themselves very unpopular with the majority of voters because of such moves. So this, again, really just exemplifies how difficult this situation is in resolving the fact that we do need more income to ensure that our public services are adequately supplied and adequately funded. So what can be done? But nevertheless, it's really vital to support the public services within the current format that they exist. Okay, so tax reform is certainly overdue, so we can expect to see that on future budgets. Okay, right, interesting stuff, highly controversial. All of this of course depends upon to what extent you believe there should be a large public sector. The UK does have a relatively large public sector, it's worth noting that. And of course, tackling areas such as the NHS once again are politically toxic. So, yeah, interesting stuff, and it could be ripe for an essay. All right.